and all those cliches. I'm talking about Our Lady of Darkness by Fritz Lieber. I've read my Fritz Lieber, of course. I've read his Langmar books. I have read his novel, science fiction novel, Gathered Darkness, and I have to say that I mostly like his earlier sword and sorcery work, like Swords Against Death is just an amazing sword and sorcery book, definitely a favorite of mine. And Gathered Darkness was okay, I guess. Our Lady of Darkness was not exactly my cup of tea. I've read it back in spring and I wanted to make a review about it, but I was not sure what to talk about because it was not my jam, alright? I know that Raf Blue Text has done a video about this book, and I really want to listen to this video because I know Raf, he's going to go deep into it, make a great analysis of it, and maybe make me reevaluate some part of it. But basically it's the Lovecraftian element that I don't like in this book, which, if you have been watching my short stories to Halloween for October, then you know that I had my fair share of Lovecraftian stories. It's how they are interpreted, how the Lovecraftian horror is interpreted in this book that I did not enjoy. But enough with babbling about how I don't enjoy the book. I'm about to talk about the book. So what's interesting about Our Lady of Darkness? It's a book that has a lot of autobiographical elements. The author is a thinly veiled version of Fritz Lieber. Like his protagonist, the author was living in San Francisco back then, and actually he uses his real address for this novel, and he was recovering from alcoholism after his wife died. His protagonist has a fascination for younger women, which, if you've read the later books of Langmar, you know that, there was a lot of old men and young women in there. And actually I think that Fritz Lieber or Grey Mouser, he is garish too in the Langmar stories, liked his women girlier and younger looking. Once you notice, you cannot unnotice in this book because there's a lot of young women, old men throughout it. But that's not the main topic of the book. So he's living there and he is an astronomer. He likes astronomy, so as he's watching through his telescope, he sees something on the opposite side. And while he's on the hill and he explores to find this mysterious figure, he sees that somebody is in his own apartment. He starts to investigate what is happening with his house. He's finding some lost books, a book about the magic of big cities known as Megapolisomancy, which for some reason when I was growing up there was sort of some of the local occult non-fiction investigative publishers used to publish book about. I haven't read them though, so I don't know. And a lot of the story is about a sort of diary by Clancaster Smith, who is part of the Holy Trinity of the Cthulhu Circle. It's Lovecraft, Robert Howard and Clancaster Smith. They are the greats of that era, of that school. And about the mystery of it, about where he was living and what was happening there, and occult stuff that was happening in the past. Pretty fascinating stuff. And it also borrows a lot of elements from Suspiria de Profundis by Thomas de Quincey. And of course, yes, you probably think of Suspiria because Dario Argento was also inspired by this book for his Witches trilogy, for his Three Sisters trilogy. But this book is not about bloodbaths. There's no scene of somebody being dragged through a window pane, stabbed in the heart, then hanged from a clothesline. No, it's the horror is pretty tame. it's mostly implied, and actually some will classify this book as urban fantasy, not as horror, because of the lack of horror elements. So yeah, maybe me reading it as a horror novel was not a right or correct idea, but still the Lovecraftian element is there. There is a lot of real life elements, a lot of references to other authors like Jack London, Ambrose Bierce or Clark Ashton Smith, who also lived in San Francisco. He makes references to Lovecraft. He even makes references to one of his own stories, A Bit of the Dark World, which I've also read and I was not impressed because it was equally tame as this one, equally suggestive, and I would say intellectual. I think that what Fritz Lieber did in this novel is that he took a lot of the elements of what made Lovecraft such an interesting author, how he used reference to the real world, how he used his sources as a way to immerse the reader into the construct of his occult secrets. Here it's Megapolisomancy, and he creates this construct out of references, out of whispers, out of elements from other fictional works to build a metafictional sort of reality. He uses fiction as a way to explain, to create a conspiracy of this is how things really are, which is a very Lovecraftian type of element, a Lovecraftian element of horror. It's also quite interesting how you get an image of the artist, of a group of artists and intellectuals living in San Francisco at that era in the late 70s. A lot of the characters were inspired by people Fritz Lieber knew, and it's kind of fascinating to read this. It's a bit on the slow side, it's very subtle, not horror enough, but at the same time it carries the kernel of a great idea in it, the idea of performing magical rituals through big cities. I think it's something that hasn't been utilized a lot, but just imagine just imagine the idea that a city can be a focus for a ritual or something. And well, I mean, it's explored here. Things are done about this, but there is also this idea of a constant mystery, a constant threat that moves the plot forward. There is a character arc, but the tilts were not there in my opinion. It was a bit of like in the bit from the Dark World. Here everything was too suggestive, too analytical, too conceptual to grab me. Does this mean that you shouldn't pass on Our Lady of Darkness? No, of course not. You should definitely not pass on this book. It's an interesting read, it's fascinating, you may like it. Again, I complain about it. It was not my jam, but I say that it was fascinating and it was doing what it was doing exceedingly well. What it was doing was not something I enjoy reading, but this happens. So yeah, if you find a copy of this book, give it a read. It's quite short, it's fascinating, and I think people can build a lot upon the concepts and the ideas of this book. And personally, I think I would go over this book at some point. This book was given to me from a friend, and he said that hey, I've got this book 2 times, so take this copy, read it, and if you want to keep it, just pay me an amount of money, or if you want to give it back, just give it back. And I said okay, I'll keep it, and because I want to give it another try at some point. Maybe what I was expecting going into this book was completely different from what it was. What I know now is that I'm going to watch Raf's video, and I'll leave a link in the description below, so you can go watch it for yourself. Probably it's a much better review than this one, because it's definitely more enthusiastic about it. But I didn't want to watch a review and then come and do a review of my own, because yeah, what's the point of that? I want to express my ideas about the book, and they're not positive or right, they're a bit in the middle, but you know, it happens. Not every book would be to our liking despite being good or not. I have loved mediocre books, and I have not enjoyed books that are great, and I think this is the latter. This happens with books. That's the joy of reading. You'll never know when you find a book you will love, or when you'll find a fascinating book that it won't tickle your fancy. But yeah, we should go out of our comfort zones and look for more books. So that was it. That was my review for Our Lady of Darkness. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon. Stay spooky.